Hello and welcome to Tech Deals. 12 games benchmarked on these two $2,000 gaming PCs. I've previously covered these before. Links in the video description below to the individual full playlist on these, parts overview, build guides, other performance tests, and more. But in short, this is an AMD Ryzen 7 3800X based PC featuring an AMD Radeon RX 5700 XT. And this computer is an Intel i7-9700KF 8-core, 8-thread based PC featuring an RTX 2070 Super. Now, they are different video cards, but they are extremely similar in terms of overall performance. I've covered that before on my 16 GPU comparison and others. So essentially, we have all Team Red versus Team Green/Blue between Intel and NVIDIA over here. Now, I said these are $2,000 builds, and one comment that I've gotten from a number of viewers is, you could build that hardware for less. Yes, you can. Custom PCs are custom. If you watch my parts overview in the first video linked in the video description below, I talk extensively about the components that were included, what's optional, and what you could strip out to get that price way down. These are nice builds with 4 terabytes of SSD and a bunch of other nice features. So they are a premium experience, not just a what's the cheapest possible computer you could put these CPUs into, turn it on, and call it a day. In any case, we've got 12 games here to show you today. I'm going to show you footage from each of them with MSI Afterburner real-time performance numbers. If you look at the length of the video down there, you might very well say, how long is this? Well, keep in mind that with 12 games, if I just put a minute of each game in along with the benchmark chart afterward and some analysis, I'll talk through the numbers and explain what you're seeing and my experience of using the computer. Well, 2 minutes per game is going to be 24 minutes just for the benchmarks. And there's actually just over 22 minutes spent on the games and the benchmarks. If you just want to see the charts, well, that's what Patreon is for. All of the performance charts you're seeing here are posted in image format on Patreon, and they were posted before the video went live. So if you want early access to the benchmark charts and you want to see them outside of a video format, please consider supporting using Patreon down in the video description below. Now, after the benchmarks are over, I'm going to have a little bit more discussion and analysis on my opinions of these machines, which CPU I prefer, which graphics card I prefer, and how maybe I would actually do it. Now, I'm going to put the full parts list up on the screen here just for those who don't want to go look at the original parts guides, or maybe you watched them several weeks ago and you forgot. But I'm not going to detail what's in these computers here. That's not the point. The point is the game performance benchmarks. 1440p high detail on all of them. So we're not constrained by the limitations in 1080p on the 5700 XT, which AMD still hasn't fixed. And I think 1440p is the right resolution for somebody looking for an 8-core system at a premium experience point. You could do 4K, you could do 1080p, but it's a nice middle ground. With all that being said, let's get to the benchmarks, and I'll talk to you some more about these when we get back. Our first benchmark today is Assassin's Creed Odyssey, everybody's favorite optimized game from Ubisoft. Wait a minute, no, everybody's favorite unoptimized game from Ubisoft. If you look at the CPU usage, you're going to see something that, let's just say, is going to become a trend. The usage on these two CPUs is wildly different, and I will try hard not to repeat this point 14 times throughout this video, but that's because the 3800X has 16 threads and the 9700KF has 8. So naturally, the 9700KF is using twice as much CPU power because it has fewer threads to divide itself across, 16 versus 8. VRAM usage is about the same, main system RAM usage is about the same, frame rates are about the same because, of course, the computer's not doing anything else other than running this benchmark. Something to keep in mind for future-proofing is future game demands, what they require, as well as multitasking and running stuff in the background. But otherwise, both of these computers run this game more or less the same. 78 frames per second average on the 3800X versus 84 on the 9700KF, 62 and 71 on the 1% low, and 51 and 61 on the 0.1% low. These are very, very close to each other, and it's worth noting, I know, these have different video cards in them, and the RTX 2070 Super is a tiny bit faster than the RX 5700 XT. Not by much, but it's a little bit, and that represents some of this difference. Otherwise, these are very comparable machines, at least when it comes to Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Next up, we have Counter-Strike Global Offensive, and this is kind of a hybrid test because it's not a built-in benchmark, but it's not live gameplay, meaning I'm not playing it because, frankly, I'm terrible at this game. I used to be pretty good at it back when it was Counter-Strike 1.6 and it was the Half-Life 1 mod. Oh my gosh, 20 years ago. Oh, being old sucks. But unfortunately, 20 years later, my reflexes aren't there. So, you are watching a replay of professional teams, and you are basically seeing it bounce between the characters throughout the replay system. It gives you an idea of the performance, it gives you an idea of the frame rate. Just keep in mind I'm not actually controlling the game. If you look at the performance numbers up top, you'll notice something interesting, which you won't notice on most of these tests. Both graphics cards are not fully saturated. Both graphics cards are not at 100%. So what you're seeing is actually what the CPUs are capable of rather than the graphics cards. Now this is 1440p high detail, and I'm fully aware that super competitive players don't usually play this at 1440p high detail. However, look at the frame rates. Yeah, might as well if you have this level of hardware. Now to be sure, this is Counter-Strike. I mean, this hardware is utterly ridiculous overkill for Counter-Strike. I get it. But that's darned impressive performance. And if you want to play at high resolution, high detail, and you want to have insanely high frame rates, well, here you go. This is how you do it. I let both run for 20 minutes, but needless to say, I'm not going to show you all 20 minutes of footage. 260 frames per second average on the 3800X versus 282 on the 9700KF. The 1% low is perhaps more interesting, and realize this is over 20 minutes. 125 to 177. Counter-Strike's an old game, it doesn't have any Ryzen optimizations, so if this is your jam and this is your main thing, well, frankly, Intel's better. Dawn of War 3 is a recent game addition that I added due to viewer request. Anytime you want to see something new added to the benchmarks, if it's something that I can reasonably add in, I will certainly do so. I've gotten a lot of interesting oddball requests for things like X-Plane 11 and whatnot that frankly are not going to get tested, although maybe the upcoming Microsoft Flight Simulator will when it launches, depending upon how challenging that is to benchmark consistently and how much time it takes to set up, but it's on my radar. In any case, I do appreciate the feedback and suggestions in the comment section below. As for performance here, 111 frames per second on the 3800X, 125 on the 9700KF. The 1% low has a fairly large difference there, 75 to 99. That is 25% difference and a fairly large win for the Intel NVIDIA team versus the all AMD team. Moving on to Deus Ex Mankind Divided, we see something different from the previous tests. Look at the CPU usage. It's almost the same between the two, not quite. But what's interesting is on the Ryzen 7 3800X, the game is activating hyperthreading. It's attempting to use more threads than it is using on the 9700KF. But it does not have a higher frame rate. In fact, those frames are almost identical in terms of performance because, of course, the two video cards are basically the same in terms of performance, very, very close in any case. So normally you would see the i7 have a higher CPU usage. But in this particular case, that simply is just not the case. It's just using more of the AMD chip without actually getting more frames out of it. This is a good opportunity to point out the clock speed of the chips. You notice we're running at about 4.4 gigahertz on the 3800X. It runs at about 4.2 gigahertz on a 3700X. There's about a 200 megahertz real-world difference between the 37 and the 3800X, which is really not a big deal at the end of the day. Just like running the 9700KF at 4.7, 4.9, or 5.0 doesn't really matter as much as maybe having that magic round number. I mean, the even 5 gigahertz is nice and it sounds great, but the default MCE multi-core enhancement boost on a 9700KF is 4.9, not 5. And, well, 4.9 just sounds less, so we use 5 gigahertz. In any case, there's virtually no difference here whatsoever. 91 to 90, 72 to 74, and 66 to 72. That's about the least interesting benchmark yet. How about we do something else, shall we? F1 2018, this is a much more interesting benchmark and there's a lot to unpack. Thankfully, it's a longer benchmark run, so I have more time to talk. The graphics card usage starting at the first line of MSI Afterburner is basically running at 100%. There might be a couple of points where it comes off of it, but it's basically running at full and the clock speeds are stable. So the graphics cards are doing pretty well. But the performance is not remotely the same between these two machines. And it's not just clock speed and it's not just cores, because if you look at the Intel chip, you'll notice we're running between 50 to 60%. It just jumped to 70%. There's 65. So you'd be expecting something in the 25 to 35% range on the AMD, but it's not. Notice on the AMD side, we're currently running at 20, 22%, 21. That's part of the reason why we have a lower frame rate on the AMD. For those of you watching the real-time performance numbers, the AMD system is getting absolutely demolished by the Intel system. To be sure, the video cards are different, and F1 2018 may very well just prefer the NVIDIA card. That is a thing, and unfortunately, without changing the cards and changing the systems, that's not something we're going to look at here in this particular benchmark. Although I've done different graphics card tests on the same CPU to remove that, so you can look that up on my 16 GPU comparison if you're interested. 161 frames per second average on the AMD side, 238 frames per second average on the Intel/NVIDIA side. That is a big, big difference, and that is not a rounding error, folks. That is a huge, huge difference. Now, what's interesting is the 1% low is identical, 134 and 134. That is not a typo. 115 to 97 on the 0.1% low, which is interesting. That may have to do with the fact that the Intel side doesn't have hyperthreading, and i7-9700K with hyperthreading would probably address that to some extent. But if you want high frame rates, there you go. Far Cry New Dawn, the full-price DLC to Far Cry 5. Yes, I'm contractually obligated to say that every time I show this benchmark. This game favors Intel. Even when the video cards are the same, I've tested it enough times, it simply prefers Intel CPUs. And as you can see from the on-screen numbers, it just is faster. The more interesting fact is this balances pretty well between cores. You can see that we're using not quite 50% of the i7-9700KF, or roughly 4 cores. And you can see we're using 25% of the Ryzen 7 3800X, or roughly 4 cores. That should not surprise any of you. Now, I have not played Far Cry New Dawn personally, but I did play Far Cry 5. Not extensively, but just enough to get out into the open world to be able to tell you that these numbers are reflective of a built-in benchmark, but not necessarily the game. The usage will go up in various places in the game, especially engaged in heavy combat with real enemies. One of the issues of built-in benchmarks is they are a better graphics card test than they are a CPU test. But in any case, it is what it is. 104 to 112, 85 to 96, and then, yeah, 70 to 33. Holy smokes, what a terrible 1% low on the i7-9700KF. Get the i9 if you're going Intel. You are going to want that hyper-threading, and in the long run, I think it's a shame that this i7 doesn't have it. Gears 5. This is definitely a game that is going to use all of the graphics card you can throw at it, especially at 1440p high detail. The frame rates here are very, very close to each other, as is the CPU usage. VRAM's fine. Main system RAM is weird. Take a look at this. Now, remember that these are clean test benches. The Intel system is currently using 12 gigabytes of RAM, and the Ryzen system is currently using just under 8. I'm not sure why, to be completely honest with you, because these machines are fresh builds with fresh installs of Windows with nothing on them. And if you look at most of the other benchmarks, the RAM usage is basically even. So why is it so much higher on the Intel system? That's a really good question that I don't have an answer to. Suggestions, theories, comments, ideas, and, well, conspiracy theories, well, that's what the comment section is for down below. I'm interested to hear what you guys think as to why we have 50% higher RAM usage on the Intel system. Performance was basically the same, 94 to 96, 71 to 77, a little bit more on the 0.1% low, 57 to 70, but it's a short run, and, well, it's pretty comparable except for that really weird RAM usage issue. Interested to hear what you guys think about that. Ghost Recon Breakpoint, a game that I have demonstrated, tested, and benchmarked numerous times. I have over 50 hours of gameplay in this game so far. I know it's not everybody's favorite, but I enjoy it, and well, there you go. Now, I'm using the game's built-in benchmark for this because as much as I would love to show you more live footage, that takes time, and, well, occasionally seeing the game's built-in benchmark shows you something different than just doing some more random gameplay. It is, of course, also very precise and exact relative to open-world random gameplay. CPU usage. We are not quite double on the Intel, but of course hyperthreading is not 100% efficient, so the 3800X has got a bit more than half of the 9700KF's usage. Main system RAM usage is about right. The Intel's a little bit higher, but they're pretty close. The VRAM usage is higher on the AMD side, so if you actually add up VRAM and main system RAM, they're pretty close to each other. So that just may be the better memory management of the RTX card at work there, because NVIDIA does have better overall VRAM memory management, which is why you notice there's about a 700 megabyte difference between the cards. In fact, you'll see that consistently. If you go back and watch these benchmarks again, you'll notice the AMD card consistently uses more VRAM than the NVIDIA card does. Now, usage of both video cards is basically up at the top, so it's not a major consideration, these being very close to each other. Notice that the frame rate is just a touch higher on the Intel side, not dramatically so, and if you're just playing single player, especially if you're playing on a 60Hz monitor, it doesn't make any difference. But if you're playing on a 144Hz monitor with FreeSync or G-Sync, well, it does, a little bit, although it's not a huge issue, they're still pretty close. Just like Far Cry New Dawn, the built-in benchmark does not use as much CPU as live gameplay does. I can tell you from experience that a 8-core, 8-thread chip like the i7-9700KF is going to be using a lot more usage of the CPU during live gameplay. It's going to be, in fact, at times up to 100% CPU usage. In fact, it just jumped up to 90% right there. So it will get up there. In fact, it did hit 100% just there. The Ryzen 7 3800X may not be as fast, but it does have the benefit of having something in reserve with its hyperthreading. This game would not be crazy on a Ryzen 9 3900X 12-core 24-thread chip. Hold on, don't go crazy on me. I'm not suggesting it's faster. In fact, it'll be faster on the Intel system in terms of frame rate than it would be on the Ryzen 9, but the Ryzen 9 would have more in reserve to provide smoother performance, especially if you're live streaming. 112 to 102. Intel wins by 10 frames per second. It beats it on the 1% low as well, and massively crushes it on the 0.1% low. Why it consistently is so low on the 0.1% low, I reran this multiple times, buffered it, tested it. I've double and triple checked that number. The 0.1% low on the AMD side is much lower than it is on the Intel side, and it is repeatable. I don't know why, because it's got plenty of CPU power, but it is. Maybe memory latency, perhaps? Rainbow Six Siege is an interesting game because while this is 1440p high detail, the game, when you set it to high detail instead of ultra, sets the render resolution to 50%. Keep that in mind when you look at these frame rates. If you want to play and live stream this game, would I recommend an 8-core 8-thread CPU? No. If you just want to play this game offline without streaming, can you use an 8-core 8-thread chip? Absolutely no problem whatsoever. And in fact, if you want the highest frame rates, then certainly Intel is where you want to go. Of course, more graphics card would help because if you look at the benchmark, you'll see that the graphics cards are pegged to 100% there. So this game really loves your graphics card, but your CPU matters as well, especially for smoothness and frame pacing. But neither of these CPUs have any problems whatsoever, at least with the game's built-in benchmark. 237 frames per second on the AMD versus 248 on the Intel. That's effectively the same thing. I mean, yes, there's another 11 frames on the Intel side, but these things are so high to begin with. Whatever. 187 to 200, a little bit larger percentage-wise difference there, but still way above the 144 frames per second even a competitive gamer is likely to be using, and then 183 to 195. Of course, live gameplay is going to be different, and if you're streaming, it's going to add more load, but all things considered, at high detail, no problem. Shadow of the Tomb Raider. A couple of things about this particular benchmark. First of all, the reason why on the Intel side the numbers look different is I hadn't changed them when I set up the Intel system. I was running it this way. I did a couple of benchmarks, and then I decided to change it and add the graph for the frame time, which you see on the left. I thought I got them all changed. I missed this one, and at this point, I'd have to go plug the machine back in and update it, and, well, I'm not going to do that, so that's why the numbers look different. But it's just an MSI Afterburner settings issue. Putting that aside, we are on the NVIDIA card using DLSS and RTX. Now, I understand people go, wait a minute, you can't do that. That's not fair. Okay, hold on. On the AMD card, for the first time, we are using Fidelity FX and contrast adaptive sharpening. So we have the fancy features turned on both cards. So everybody who complained about that previously can hush, because we've turned on the pretty stuff and we've turned on the adaptive sharpening on both sides. So that makes it fair insofar as we're using the special features of the cards. When I previously tested this between AMD and NVIDIA, we had DLSS turned on the NVIDIA, but nothing on the AMD, and it really skewed the results, and people had, shall we say, a lot to say about it. So we do have Fidelity FX and we do have CIS turned on the AMD card. CPU usage is interesting. In this scene right here, it's not using a ton. And go back and watch the first scene if you want, but you'll see a segment here in the third scene in this benchmark where there's a lot of CPU usage. And there are parts of this game that are very demanding, and there's parts of this game that are not remotely demanding at all and don't remotely care about your CPU. It distinctly depends upon what you're doing. Here's a thought for you. In terms of overall smoothness, this is the kind of game where you are tomb raiding, no pun intended. You are leaping and jumping, and the timing matters because you're doing a swing and you have to leap to a rock and you have to throw your cable and you have to catch onto the ledge and shoot the enemy, and all of your timing matters when you do it. We're at 70% usage there, 71% usage, 76% usage on the i7-9700KF. There's 80% usage. You will use all 8 cores in this game, and that's for the game. That is nothing left for Windows, nothing left for watching a live stream or watching a YouTube video in another window. That's nothing left for streaming. If you just want to play this game, and you do nothing else, sure, fine, an 8-core 8-thread or even a 4-core 8-thread chip will do it, although an 8-core chip will be smoother. But an 8-core 16-thread chip will give you something left over to do some background tasks and some other things. If you're serious about streaming, a Ryzen 9 3900X is not nuts, just like Breakpoint. 94 to 109, 77 to 83, and 43 to 45. It's fine on either. It's faster on the Intel. Some of that's the CPU, some of that's the graphics card, but the bigger thing I want you to look at is not the frame rate, but the CPU usage, and ask yourself, do you tend to play games with nothing else running, or do you tend to have a bunch of stuff open and doing a lot of things at the same time? That will inform your purchase decision. Strange Brigade. I played this way back at E3 2018, even before it was released. That was pretty cool. We skipped E3 in 2019, but we might do it for fun in 2020. Rather than going and trying to make 10 tons of content, my wife and I might just go and just do a couple of little bits, but go for fun, especially if we book earlier, it'll be cheaper. We genuinely had fun at E3, and while it's not our sort of content per se, games reviews and game coverage, whatnot, I do have to say that at the very least I had fun going with my wife. This game was interesting to play. It's not my personal cup of tea, but it was well designed and it was intriguing. I haven't seen a lot about it since, and I haven't seen a lot of you talking about it, so let me know in the comments below if you still want it benchmarked. But if you're looking for a multiplayer cooperative shooter against the enemy, well, frankly, it's pretty cool. It doesn't use much CPU power, at least in the benchmark here. Take a look at those numbers. Absolutely very, very little CPU needed. 133 to 157, 100 to 124, 98 to 123. That's partly the video card and partly the CPU, maybe a little bit with clock speed and optimizations. But all of those numbers are completely sufficient to play this game. So even though the Intel numbers are higher, does it really matter? That's a personal preference, but I think it's fine on either system. Total War 3 Kingdoms, another game that I am testing due to viewer request. I mentioned before Dawn of War 3, well this is here because multiple people asked for it, and since it has a built-in benchmark, your wish is my command. Now, my biggest concern is that the built-in benchmark may or may not reflect the actual game's performance. I've never played this game. I don't play this game. It's not my cup of tea. I'm interested in y'all's feedback in the comment section below as to whether or not you think the usage you see on screen right now in terms of total CPU usage is reflective of the game. If there is another benchmark that I can download or replay or something that is more demanding than this, I might be inclined to give that a try. Of course, keeping track of that and keeping up with it and making sure it's fair is a concern. But as you can see on screen, performance is okay, but given the level of hardware involved for 1440p high detail, that's actually kind of terrible in my opinion. Most of the other games have run much better than this. The AMD system, as I speak, is only at 60 frames per second, which may be fine for this sort of game. You don't need 144 frames per second per se. But it's a lot slower than a lot of the other games, and while it's pretty and there's a lot of units on the screen, I don't know. Is this an optimization issue, or is this just what you can expect? CPU usage is predictable. You can see the Intel system is about double because half the threads, so double the percentage usage. And both graphics cards have no issues whatsoever maintaining basically 100% usage. 65 to 77 average, but it reverses for the 1% low, 58 to 50, and then 51 to 47 on the 0.1% low. Still, all these numbers are pretty close to each other. Turn the benchmark numbers off and enjoy your game. Thank you all for watching all of those benchmarks. 2 gold stars for everybody who watched the entire thing without fast forwarding. These videos take a lot of work to put together, and your support is greatly appreciated. Simply watching, liking, commenting, subscribing, and sharing the videos does make a difference. I mentioned Patreon earlier in the video. That's down in the video description below. Early access to the charts and some other information. You can also support by hitting the join button right here on YouTube, and there's a new $2 support option for just $2 per month. You get access to our custom tech deals emoji right here on YouTube, a loyalty badge which shows up here as well as in the live streams, which we certainly appreciate, and it gives you access to the Tech Deals Discord, which has a bunch of private chat channels for supporting members just like you. Come over, say hello, introduce yourself, and we certainly would appreciate it joining our community. Now, that's true also of all the support options. Patreon, Floatplane, YouTube, and Twitch all allow you access. You don't have to do all of them, just one of them gets you access to the Tech Deals Discord. With all that being said, what would I personally do? Well, in terms of value for the money, the answer is simple. Ryzen 7 3700X and an RTX 2060 Super, which isn't anything that's on the desk here, but that's what I would build at least in January of 2020 with the prices the way they're at. These systems, if you watch the live streams linked in the video description below, these were built in November. When I built the Ryzen machine, there was only a $30 price difference between the 3700 and 3800X. That's why it has a 3800X in it. At the current price point, which is closer to $70 difference, I wouldn't. So it depends upon the price. I would not buy a Ryzen 5 3600X, which you can see here on the desk, 6 cores, 12 threads, which ironically, in almost every benchmark I showed you today, would have the exact same frame rate or really, really close to it as the 3800X. But there's no future in front of it. It doesn't have as many cores, as many threads. Yes, you save a little bit of money now, but you're going to force an earlier upgrade. And in terms of longevity, I actually don't think it saves you any money when you consider total cost of ownership, how long it lasts you versus when you're forced to upgrade. On the Intel side, I put the i7-9700K here because frankly, it's the only Intel you should buy. If you are so inclined to buy an Intel machine, it's i9 or bust. At this point, I would never buy an i7-9700K. 8 cores and 8 threads doesn't have a future in front of it. For the price of the CPU, that doesn't make any sense. It's here because, well, what can I say? It's Intel. But it's not what I would buy. An i9 is what I would buy. Or wait until April when the LGA 1200, the next generation, comes out, which is an option. Now, I mentioned an RTX 2060, not the 2070. The performance difference, if you watch my 16 GPU comparison between a 2060 and a 2070, is this much. And the RTX 30 series is coming within 6 months. It's supposed to launch June of 2020. And that's soon enough that I don't want to throw any more money than I have to. I certainly wouldn't buy an RTX 2080 Ti at this point, unless you just have tons of money to throw and you just don't care about the devaluation of your card, but those things won't hold their value when the 30 series comes out. A $400 2060 is the sweet spot in terms of the NVIDIA cards if you prefer those over the RX 5700 XT, which is nice except for driver issues and the lack of some of the extra stuff, which I've discussed plenty in other videos. One of the most commonly asked questions on the other standalone benchmarks I've done on these machines is, well, they're different video cards, so swap them. No, because they are very close in performance, and that would take a lot of time, and I've done graphics card comparisons, which, as I said, you can see on my channel. This was about comparing builds and premium builds. And speaking of premium builds, earlier in the video I said I would talk about that. And I'm not going to talk about this extensively because I did that in the parts guides. What I will say, I want to address 2 points that were brought up previously in my standalone videos on these machines. Number one, storage. These things have 4 terabytes of storage. Roughly 25% of the budget of both of these computers is storage. And whenever somebody says you can build these for less, of course you can. Just take storage out of it. But games have gotten quite large these days. If you look at Call of Duty Modern Warfare, for example, that's 164 gigabytes for one game. Yes, you can buy a 500 or 1 terabyte SSD and call it a day. What, are you going to install 3 games and be done with it? Yes, you can do it technically, but that's not a practical usability scenario in my opinion. 4 terabytes might be overkill. Maybe 2 terabytes is good enough for you. I don't use hard drives anymore for games because hard drives are terrible. And so I think that this is a nice compromise for a premium build experience. Adjust as you see fit. Custom PCs are custom. The other difference is the fact that both of these computers have about $150 worth of fans and coolers, which is not necessary, but let me tell you, these things are quiet. They are nice and pleasant to sit next to, especially this thing without the front with the acoustic panels inside the Be Quiet case is extremely silent. This thing is barely audible even when it's on top of the desk. So if you want premium quiet fans and high quality coolers, they do cost something and they cost more. In fact, the coolers and the fans in here cost more than the cases do. Almost as much as the case plus the power supply. So it's all about the premium experience. Adjust as you see fit. This is not the end of the road for these 2 machines. I do have a couple of more videos coming up soon. I didn't include the charts here, but there are, at least as of recording of this, 4 standalone videos. The Division 2, Call of Duty Modern Warfare, Fortnite, and Overwatch. Each of those got between 10 to 20 minute long dedicated videos for just that game with live gameplay and a much deeper dive analysis showing performance in various parts of the game and showing an extended performance run. The Division 2, at least as of recording this, has already been published. The others have not. They will come to YouTube over time, but I'll space them out so you guys don't get sick and tired of seeing these things. If you want to see all of those results early, that's what Floatplane is for. Floatplane is the early access service for $5 a month that gives you early access to all of our videos, no ads, higher quality, and of course it directly supports the channel. So if you'd like to see Overwatch and Fortnite early, which yes, I know these machines, it's a bit overkill, but it's kind of interesting to see just how many frames per second you can get, check that out on Floatplane down in the video description below. Like this video if you like it, share it with your friends if you love it. Remember to subscribe to my channel with the big huge red button directly below. Questions, comments, thoughts, feedback, suggestions, you know where the comment section is. I don't have the time to answer everybody, but I do read all of them and I appreciate you taking the time. Links to the video description below to the 2 playlists with the build guides and the parts overviews and the standalone performance tests down below. The parts on Amazon, Newegg, and eBay, those are affiliate links. They support the channel. Those will be down there below as well. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I will see all of you next time.